Hello and a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining this Hardman Co Investor Forum. My name is Keith Hiscock and I'm the Chief Executive of Hardman Co. These forums give investors the chance to hear a company's investment case and then question the management. Our first presentation comes from Dr. Martin Hall, who is our head of our life sciences team here at Hardman Co. Martin holds a B.Pharm in pharmacy from the School of Pharmacy at the University of Liverpool, has a PhD in neuropharmacology from the University of London, and then after 2 years of a postdoctoral Royal Society Fellowship at the Collège de France in Paris, he became leader in biochemical pharmacology at the Park Davis Research Centre in Cambridge. Martin's career started in the city as a healthcare analyst back in 1987, so he's got plenty of experience. And Martin's going to make a short presentation on rare diseases and specialist products. Martin, over to you.
Welcome everybody, and hope you enjoy mine and the company presentations. We've got three very interesting companies presenting today. Right, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of the pharmaceutical industry. It is very brief because, as Keith said, I've been following this sector for a long time, and I could actually talk about it for the whole session, but we've got more important companies to listen to. I do find the whole industry very inspirational. What I've learned over many years is that there are a number, or there have been, and there are always a number of world-beating technologies that come out of the UK, whether they're in the industry itself, universities, or small companies. And I think that over the last 18 months, this has been exemplified and really noticeable through COVID-19. The challenges brought about by that pandemic really saw a number of companies in the sector and technologies step up to the mark to try and address those issues. And those are the types of reasons why what gets me excited, learning about the new technologies. Throughout my time as an analyst, I'm sure you can imagine I've met many interesting people, and they too get very excited about the technologies that they're developing. At Hardman, we've got a fantastic database on pharmaceuticals, and we're building on that every day because every day provides new information, and that goes into that database. And we try to portray segments of that in our publications and add value in a slightly different way. What gets me out of bed? Well, ultimately, I don't think there's a day that passes without me learning something new. And that is both inspirational and exciting. And then being able to collate all of this information together to try and add value in the research that we produce. But the one thing that has never changed over all the time I've followed the industry is that it's continuously evolving. So just a very quick look from an investment standpoint. What are the opportunities? What are the risks? I think this is fairly obvious and straightforward. There's clearly clinical need. We're very aware that antibiotics are becoming less effective. I think I could easily have put anti-infectives there because of COVID-19, which is, of course, an antiviral. COVID-19 has highlighted the mental health of the nation, and that's not just the UK, that's globally, and the dearth of drugs that are really effective in CNS, central nervous system disorders. And of course, everybody talks about oncology. There's clearly a global need for new medicines, and this is also the case not only in developed countries, but in the less developed countries as well. We're all conscious of the aging population, but what I've seen over the years is whereas big industry used to focus on a number of major causes of death some years ago, so for example, cardiovascular problems, As we've got medicines and technologies to solve those problems, then, of course, the problems move into other disease states. And I think we probably put oncology into that category. Lifestyle plays an incredibly important part of the opportunity. And personal lifestyle is going to be increasingly important. And there was a survey out from the NHS just last year that said that basically 50% of the population in the UK, including children, is overweight, has a BMI that is too large. And therefore, this is inevitably going to lead to more diabetes in the future. On the risk side, nothing much has changed. It still takes a long time to develop a new drug. The probability of success, despite all of the efforts of a number of people, but the probabilities haven't really changed in the time that I've been following it. There have been some very interesting improvements in regulation, but it still is a major hurdle and does add 1 year to the development of a new drug. We're all very conscious of the fact that it's a very expensive process. Clearly, some people can do it for less money than others, but I'm just looking at averages. And the expensive process I'll show you in the next couple of slides. And the economics are increasingly important, whereas before, say 20 years ago, whilst economics were important, it's now an important consideration for all new drugs to know the ability of payers to pay and to actually provide health economics of the benefits of using your product. But the thing that has never changed is the increasing demand for new technologies. This next slide just shows the number of FDA approvals over the last 20 years. If we went back even further, of course, it would only be small molecule new drug applications or new chemical entities. Biopharmaceuticals actually kicked in for the first time in the year 2000. And you can see that in the last few years, there has been an improvement in the number of approvals made by the FDA. But at the end of the day, this is still not enough. I follow approximately 40 drug companies, 40 major companies throughout the industry on a global basis. And these numbers equate to only one new drug per major company per annum. And of course, if you're selling billions of dollars of sales, that's not enough to replace an old drug that's losing patent protection. So just to show you a little bit on the drug development costs, you can see that back in 1990, $14.8 billion was spent on developing drugs. And that equated to 15.3% of the pharmaceutical sales of those companies. And you can see how much that has risen, and such that last year, according to my numbers, and they might be out by about $1 billion, but of the 40 companies that I'm monitoring, they between them spent $138.7 billion. And that now represents 20.2% of sales being reinvested back into R&D. I think there's a perception that there's thousands and thousands of drugs approved and available for consumers. The reality is that since 1990, in the 40 years, there have only been 980 new chemical entities approved by the FDA. And the average, and the total amount of money spent, as you can see, is this staggering nearly 2 trillion, phenomenal sums. The average cost per drug last year the average cost of doing all of those drugs on a 10-year cycle was 2 billion, just under 2 billion per annum, which of course is a large number that is an average for the big industry. But interestingly, when I rolled around the data for the last 2 years, that average has actually just eased off a little bit, which reflects the increased number of approvals being made by the FDA. But my conclusion from all of this is the big companies can't develop all the drugs themselves, so they need the biotech and the specialist pharma companies, and vice versa, because the small companies often struggle to fully commercialize their products. And we're going to hear about some very interesting approaches in the companies today. So I just wanted to focus a little bit on an area of the industry that I see changing, and it is relevant to the talks that are going to follow. Again, I think there's a perception that the pharmaceutical industry has really strong growth. But the reality is that whilst there are new drugs hitting the market, and they do tend to be quite expensive compared to previous drugs, the reality is, of course, that there are always patents expiring and the introduction of generics. And over the last few years, even those early biopharmaceuticals are now being replaced by biosimilars, as they're called. So overall, the growth in the industry looks to be about 4.5%, 4.4% over the next 5 years. And that's not materially different from the figure that we've had for the last 5 years. But when you cut it in a slightly different way and actually look at, I've put it in as rare diseases, but I think I'm trying to include specialty products, products really targeting patients with unmet medical need, and rare diseases. These were areas that big pharma had no interest in 20, 30 years ago. They just wanted to focus on the very large opportunities. But you can see that this is a major growth area and does represent quite a significant proportion of the industry today. And you can see that we're expecting a growth rate of a low double digits, 12% over the next 5 years. And so it is an area that is increasingly interesting to the investment community. So just to summarize, hopefully I've whetted your appetite. It's an absolutely fantastic industry to follow. Of course, I've got a personal interest. It's been my life for my whole academic and working life. But from an investment standpoint, hopefully I've alerted people to just to be aware of the chances of success and what the risk-reward analysis is. It's fantastic if you happen to pick the right companies, and the right companies really commercialize their products well. Management is key, in my opinion, to success, and having people that really know and understand where their products fit in the industry. Of course, from an investment standpoint and share price movements, it is always important to know the timing of potential capital increases. Fortunately, certainly 2 of the 3 companies today have good balance sheets, and I'm sure you'll hear more from their CEOs. And finally, just a word of warning, all CEOs think their shares are cheap. But having said that, I do think that all 3 opportunities that are presented tonight, that really is the case from a Hardman perspective as well. So if you are an investor, good luck, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Martin, I've got a couple of questions, if I may. So the first one is going back to your point about how long it takes to get approval for a new drug. I guess the general perception is that it's one of astonishment as how fast the vaccines got approval for COVID. Was that something unusual? Are there any lessons to be learnt from that? Might we be able to shorten the process of getting approval in the future for other drugs, for other treatments?
I think it's going to be very difficult. Certainly, it's opened up the eyes of what can be achieved when the right technologies are put in front of the regulators. Clearly, with COVID, there was an element of government pressure to approve the products. And I think that this was particularly the case at the FDA. I think they would have preferred to have gone somewhat slower, but that wasn't a choice for them. They had to work quickly, and it just shows how the regulators can really work quickly. Of course, the biggest concern of the regulators is safety. And I think that maybe there might be some improvements from the overall process if you can show really good safety data from a very early stage. But the reality is, Keith, that all drugs have to go through a specific process: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then go through the regulatory process. And even in the best will in the world, you might be able to shave with certain drugs a little bit off that, but the reality is not much.
And my second question, the final question, is if you had the choice between a company with a good balance sheet and a company with a good drug, which would you go for?
I would always go with the good drug, because I think if you've got a good drug and it's put across to the investment community in the right way, it will always get funded.
Okay.
Famous last words.
Thank you very much for that, Martin.